to next, because Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, وَلَوْ هُدُوا لَعَلِمُوا أَنَّ الْقَدَرَ أَمَرَنَا أَن نَرْضَى بِهِ وَنَصْبِرَ عَلَى مُوجَبِهِ فِي الْمَصَائِبِ التي تصيبنا كالفقر والمرض والخوف. So he says that if these people had been rightly guided, if they were upon guidance, then they would have known that we have been ordered to be pleased with al-qadar, and that we show patience upon whatever comes to us by way of calamities. So when calamities befall us, such as poverty and illness and fear and the likes, then we have been ordered to be patient towards these things. In other words, and then he continues, we'll come to the point, he continues and he says, he mentions the verse in the Quran, وَمَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَمَن يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ. No calamity befalls except by the permission of Allah, and the one who believes in Allah, then his heart will be guided aright. He will guide his heart aright. This is in chapter 64 at-Taghabun, chapter 64, verse number 11. And then Shaykh al-Islam says, قَالَ بَعْدُ السَّلَفِ. Some of the Salaf said, or one of the Salaf said, هُوَ الرَّجُلُ. This verse refers to a man, هُوَ الرَّجُلُ تُصِيبُهُ الْمُصِيبَةِ فَيَعْلَمُ أَنَّهَا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. And he knows that some calamity comes to him and he knows it is from Allah. فَيَرْضَى وَيُسَلِّمُ. So he's pleased and he submits to it. So in other words, it is calamities. When calamities come to you, then you can use al-qadar as a means of being strong and firm and patient, and as an argument as to why you should not despair. Right? This is the way that you can use al-qadar as an argument. Meaning, al-qadar can be used for calamities. It cannot be used for sins and disobedience and shirk, polytheism and disbelief. No, it can only be used for calamities. And this is made very, very clear in the next verse, which Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions. He says, وَقَالَ تَعَالَى, and he the exalted said, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مِّن قَبْلِ أَن نَّبْرَأَهَا إِنَّ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ يَسِيرٌ لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا آتَاكُمْ. This verse occurs in Surah Al-Hadid, the 57th chapter of the Quran, chapter 57, verses number 22 and 23. In these verses, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, no calamity occurs on the earth, nor in yourselves, except that it is written, already written, before we bring it into existence, before we make it to be. Indeed, that is easy upon Allah, in order that you may not despair over that which has taken place, meaning over that which has passed you by, and nor that you may rejoice with that which He has given you. Right? So now this is explaining the wisdom and the benefit in believing in al-qada wal-qadar. And wisdom and the benefit in believing in al-qada wal-qadar, which is what it is, as Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan now goes on to explain. He says that al-qadar can only be used as an argument for calamities that befall you. And so that you can show patience upon them, and so that you do not despair. This is how you can use al-qadar as an argument. But as for sins, then you can never ever use al-qadar as an argument, because a person actually has the ability, he has the control over his own actions to avoid polytheism, to avoid disbelief, to avoid sins, to avoid disobedience. Each person knows that he has control over his own actions. He knows he is not forced to do his own actions. So therefore he cannot use al-qadar as an argument. However, with calamities, with a calamity, these are things which are outside of your control. They are brought to you by way of the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal, by factors which are outside of your control. You do not have the control over the factors of disease and death. I mean, obviously to a certain degree, because, if you, in some respects, you can do things which will lead you to an illness, or it can lead you to a premature death. So obviously those things, you are responsible for them. But when we speak of calamities that come to you, like an accident or some extreme weather, for example, or a famine, for example, or the outbreak of some violence or something like this, right? All of these things are out there. You do not have control over them, right? You only have control over your own deeds. So those things which come to you by way of Allah's decree, then you can use al-qadar as an argument, but in the sense that you use it to avoid despair, to avoid grieving over what has happened, right? Rather, it is to develop patience and to be firm and to be resolute, right? This is how al-qadar is used to develop a strong personality, not to justify sins, because this argument is false, right? So each person has the capability, the ability to choose to act, to sin, or to be righteous, to repent, or to persist upon his evil ways. Every person has that. As Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَيَعْفُو عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. Right? So all of the calamities that come to a person anyway, in any case, it is because of his own sins. If a calamity comes to you, it is, because either it is Allah putting you to trial, or it is a punishment for your sins. So if calamities come to you, why did they come to you? It is because you disobeyed Allah Azza wa Jal. So you can use al-qadar as an argument for calamities, for a calamity, but you cannot use al-qadar as an argument for committing sin. Right. Now, that distinction is very important, because very shortly we are going to discuss the hadith in which there was an argument between Adam alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam, as occurs in the hadith, right? And we shall come to this very shortly. In order to understand that hadith, right, we must understand this point, that, for example, let's just say, for example, a person knows from his own experience that he's been committing sins, he's been disobeying Allah Azza wa Jal, and at some point, a calamity happens in his life, right? That calamity could be an illness, it could be a loss of possessions, or whatever it might be. And so now there's two things he can do. In fact, there's a number of things. First of all, he knows that the calamity came to him because of his own sin and disobedience, right? Obviously he knows that there's a connection between these things, that you commit sins and disobedience, then at some point some calamities are going to come to you, right? So we acknowledge this, first of all. Secondly, he can use al-qadar as an argument. He can say that, okay, this calamity that's come to me, this hardship, this difficulty, this illness that came to me, whatever it might be, right? It was by way of al-qadar, and Allah decreed it upon me. So therefore I should be firm, I should be strong, I should not, I should not grieve, or I should not despair, or things of that nature. Rather, I should have patience and, continue. Right? So now, this argument only applies to the calamity itself. But as for the sin, you cannot use al-qadar as an argument for the actual sins that you committed that led to the calamity. Rather, for those things you say that the sins I committed out of my own, because I had control over my own behavior. So I did what I did knowingly and willingly. So al-qadar is not an argument for me in those sins which I committed, but which in turn led to the calamities which are actually outside of my control. Because the calamities came to you by way of Allah's decree. Allah brought those things to you from His decree, from His wisdom, from His justice, right? As a punishment and as a cleansing and as a purification. So that part of it was outside of your control. So therefore you can use al-qadar, and you can say to aid you and to assist you and to be patient in this hardship and this calamity, and so that you think that this is from Allah, it's a trial, a tribulation, I could never have prevented it because Allah it's brought to me by Allah Azza wa Jal. You can use that as an argument, but you cannot say, you can never argue, you can never say, well, my sins were from Allah's decree, so I should, there's no reason why I shouldn't stop sinning because it's from Allah's decree. Allah decreed them upon me, right? You can't start thinking like this. You can't start thinking, because then this leads to different forms and types of misguidance. It leads to numerous types of misguidance, right? And it's clear that you had a choice. You clearly had a choice in the actions that you did, but you didn't have a choice in, the calamity that came to you. That was outside of your control. So there you can use al-qadar, but you cannot use al-qadar for the sins that you committed. So this will lead us nicely, into the next point. But before we move to the next point, we'll just finish off this section, which is that, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, that you could use al-qada wal-qadar for your calamities in which you have no control, you have no disposal. But as for sins and disobedience, you cannot use them as an argument. This is a tremendous and mighty principle, and we can see the difference between Iblis, Shaitan, and the way he argued, and between Adam alayhi salam. Now look at the difference. As for Iblis, what did Iblis do? Iblis was commanded, he disobeyed from his arrogance, and then he tried to use al-qadar as an argument in his favor. What did he say to Allah Azza wa Jal? He said, Rabbi bima aghwaytani. He said, oh my Lord, because you have caused me to go astray. Oh my Lord, because you caused me to go astray. Meaning, you caused me to disobey you. This is in Surah Al-Hijr, the 15th chapter, verse number 39. 15, verse number 39. In other words, he himself refused to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam, and as a result of which he disobeyed Allah. And then instead of blaming himself and accepting the fault, he argued by way of Allah's decree. He said, you caused me to go astray. And but as for Adam alayhi salam, what did Adam alayhi salam do? He acknowledged, when he ate from the tree, he was prohibited from eating from the tree, but he disobeyed Allah. So what did he do? He acknowledged his sin and he repented to Allah Azza wa Jal. And he and his wife, they both said, قَالَ رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. O our Lord, we have wronged ourselves, and if you do not forgive us and show mercy to us, then we will be amongst the losers. So look at the difference. Iblis tried to argue by way of al-qadar, and Adam alayhi salam, he did not make an argument by way of al-qadar for his sin. Rather, he repented and he asked for Allah's forgiveness and for his mercy. And this is a clear proof of the difference between Iblis and his followers among the mushrikun, the pagans, the polytheists, and Adam alayhi salam. And because he repented, then Allah Azza wa Jal, he forgave him and forgave him. But as for Iblis, who argued by way of al-qadar, then he cursed him and he expelled him from paradise. So what we'll do is we can stop at this point in the lesson, and what this does is it very nicely leads us into the next point, which is the hadith in al-Bukhari and Muslim about the argument that took place between Adam alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam. And this is an argument to do with, it relates to the topic of al-qadar, and it makes the same point that we have just made from the from the previous discussion. So we'll end our lesson there for today. So basically, in today's lesson, we continued the discussion of the issue of al-qadar, and when al-qadar can be used as an argument, when it cannot be used as an argument. And this is part and parcel of the ongoing discussion related to the creational reality, al-haqiqa al-kawniyya, and the religious reality, al-haqiqa ad-diniyya. Right? So it's in the context of that discussion, and Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is continuing to highlight the differences between those who accept both the religious reality on top of the creation reality and those who do not. Those who halt at al-qadar, those who halt at the creational reality, and how this can lead to tremendous misguidance. And so this gives us a good detailed insight into this topic, and how and where mistakes can enter into this topic. So we'll end our lesson there for today, and inshallah we'll continue with this discussion in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.